The late morning sun cast a golden sheen on Fifth Avenue, where polished storefronts gleamed like museum exhibits. Ava Morgan, dressed in dark wash jeans, a cream-colored cashmere sweater, and Italian leather flats, stepped out of a black town car in front of Elysian Beauty, New York's most exclusive luxury cosmetics store. Her hair was pulled into a sleek bun, and her makeup was minimal but flawless, just enough to accentuate her natural beauty. She wore no flashy jewelry, only a simple gold wedding band that sparkled subtly under the sunlight. The doorman barely looked at her as he pulled open the door. No greeting. No smile. Ava gave a polite nod, unfazed. She was used to these small slights. Being a black woman in high-end spaces often came with a quiet, cold kind of resistance. Inside, the store felt more like a cathedral than a cosmetics boutique. Italian marble floors gleamed under crystal chandeliers. Soft instrumental music played, and the scent of rare botanicals lingered in the air. Sales associates, all in black uniforms, moved like stylists on a fashion runway, tablets in hand, attending to customers with studied elegance. Ava stepped inside and waited. She'd been here before, at the Miami location, but this was her first visit to the flagship store. Her eyes wandered over the artful displays, the delicate glass jars of serums and creams that could cost more than a mortgage payment. Yet no one approached her. 3 white women entered after her. The first, wrapped in a Chanel tweed jacket and carrying a Birkin bag, was greeted immediately by name and offered champagne. The second, a younger woman with auburn hair and tennis-toned arms, was whisked away to a private consultation suite. The third, a 20-something in a fur coat, was fawned over the moment she walked in. Ava waited. Nothing. Eventually, she wandered toward the back, drawn to a 6-piece skincare collection she had researched. Priced at just over $20,000 with tax, it was one of the store's most exclusive offerings. She was studying the ingredient list when a man appeared beside her. Tall, with silver hair and an expensive-looking suit, he stared her down like she was an intruder. "Can I help you find the exit?" he asked, a thin smile on his lips. His name tag read Richard Whitmore, General Manager. Ava blinked. "No, thank you. I'm interested in this collection." He looked her over, eyes lingering on her modest attire. "These products require a significant investment," he said slowly, as if she couldn't grasp the meaning. "We've had issues with people handling items they can't afford. I'll need to see proof of income or ID." Her breath caught, not in surprise, but in disbelief. "I don't carry income statements when I shop," she replied calmly, gesturing toward the nearby VIP area. "Are you asking them for financials too?" Whitmore's tone sharpened. "These items cost more than you make in a year. We don't do samples or Instagram selfies for free. People like you don't belong in Elysian." At that moment, 2 security guards appeared, closing in like she was a shoplifter. Ava stood still, her posture perfect, her dignity intact. She reached into her purse, pulled out her phone, and dialed one number. "Jonathan," she said, her voice low and steady. "You won't believe what just happened." As Ava stepped away from the store, the autumn air cooled her flushed cheeks. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. That wasn't who she was. Her heels clicked against the concrete with a measured rhythm as she walked towards Central Park, the noise of the city fading behind her. To passers-by, she might have looked like any woman heading to a lunch meeting or gallery opening. But inside, her heart beat with a quiet storm of humiliation and resolve. What Richard Whitmore, the store manager, didn't know, what none of the Elysian Beauty staff could have imagined, was who Ava Morgan truly was. Ava wasn't just any customer. She wasn't a tourist or a window shopper playing dress-up on Fifth Avenue. She was Ava Morgan Reynolds, the wife of Jonathan Reynolds, one of the wealthiest men in America. Forbes had listed Jonathan's net worth north of $18 billion, and that figure barely scratched the surface. He wasn't just a tech mogul, he was a visionary who had built Reynolds Technologies from a dorm room project into a global empire that powered over 60% of the world's cloud infrastructure. Yet for all his fame and fortune, Jonathan was fiercely private. The media rarely caught more than glimpses of his personal life, and even fewer knew the face of the woman who had quietly walked beside him for nearly a decade. Ava liked it that way. While she supported her husband's work, she had never been interested in basking in his spotlight. She was her own person, with her own story. Ava was born and raised in a working-class neighborhood in Detroit. The daughter of a retired Army mechanic and a school librarian, she knew early on the value of hard work and quiet perseverance. She excelled in school, earned a scholarship to Spelman College, and later completed her MBA at Stanford. Her career in nonprofit development had helped raise millions for underserved communities across the country, work she continued to this day, though few knew it. It was at a charity gala in Chicago that she first met Jonathan. She was the event director, dressed in flats and a headset, running logistics. He was the keynote speaker. While others vied for his attention, Ava had barely noticed him, too focused on making sure the lighting cues were right and the dinner arrived hot. Jonathan later told friends that it was her indifference to his status that captivated him. Their courtship was quiet, built on shared values rather than wealth or influence. When they married in a small ceremony in Big Sur, California, Ava had insisted on keeping her maiden name for professional work. "My name carries my father's discipline and my mother's dreams," she once said. "I won't let it disappear." Though she now lived in a penthouse on Central Park West with floor-to-ceiling windows and museum-worthy artwork, Ava remained grounded. She did her own shopping, walked the family dog most mornings, and preferred handwritten notes over emails. So when Richard Whitmore saw only a broke woman in a cashmere sweater and flats, he wasn't just making a mistake, he was underestimating a woman who had worked for everything she had, and who had the ear and heart of a man powerful enough to buy the very building she'd just been kicked out of. And she was about to remind them all exactly who she was. Back at the penthouse overlooking Central Park, Jonathan Reynolds stood motionless, staring out at the Manhattan skyline. From this height, the city looked calm, orderly, even. But inside, something had snapped. Not in a reckless, reactionary way, but in the cold, calculating manner of a man used to solving billion-dollar problems with quiet precision. He'd received Ava's call less than 2 hours earlier. She had told him not to act impulsively, that she wanted to handle it her way. And he respected that, he always had. But as she hung up, her voice calm but trembling, Jonathan knew this wasn't just about her. It was about something deeper. It was about every time he'd been followed by security in department stores as a teenager. About the time his mother, a retired nurse, was asked if she was lost in the lobby of a luxury hotel. It was about the quiet indignities, the ones that don't make headlines but leave bruises on the soul. Ava's humiliation was personal, yes. But it was also generational. He turned from the window and dialed his chief legal officer. "Marcus, I need you," he said. "Pull the corporate records for Elysian Beauty. I want to know who owns them, how they're structured, and where they're vulnerable. I don't want a reaction. I want a resolution." Marcus, a seasoned attorney who had been with Reynolds Technologies since the early days, didn't ask questions. "I'll call you back within the hour," he said. True to his word, by the time Ava returned home, Jonathan already had a plan in motion. They're owned by a parent company called Elysian Holdings, he explained as they sat across from each other in their kitchen, a sleek, modern space with softwood tones and warm lighting. Publicly traded, but mostly held by private shareholders. Their stock took a hit last quarter. We can quietly begin acquiring shares tonight. I want controlling interest before the end of the week. Ava raised an eyebrow. You're talking about buying the entire company? I'm talking about changing the system, he replied, his voice low but resolute. You saw how they treated you. Imagine how many others they've dismissed, people who didn't have a voice, or a partner with my resources. She exhaled slowly, weighing the scale of what he proposed. Are you doing this for me? Or are you doing this for you? I'm doing this for all of us, he said gently. For the people who've been told they don't belong. For the young girl who'll walk into that store one day and be treated like a queen instead of a suspect. He reached across the table, taking her hand in his. And I'm doing it for you because no one humiliates my wife, not publicly, not privately, and walks away without consequences. Within hours, Reynolds Technologies' private investment division began moving funds. Lawyers worked through the night in multiple time zones. By dawn, the Reynolds family would own the future of Elysian Beauty. But no one would know it, yet. Because Jonathan didn't want revenge. He wanted a reckoning. The next morning, just before 10 a.m., a gleaming Rolls-Royce Phantom pulled up in front of Elysian Beauty's Fifth Avenue flagship store. The car, customized in deep obsidian black with a mandarin leather interior, glided to a smooth stop, catching the eyes of tourists, commuters, and store employees alike. It wasn't just a luxury vehicle, it was a symbol of power arriving with purpose. From the rear door stepped Ava Morgan Reynolds, dressed in a tailored white pantsuit that shimmered slightly in the early light. Her natural hair was styled in a regal updo, held by a single gold pin. She wore no designer logos, no overstatement. Just confidence, the kind that comes not from money, but from knowing exactly who you are. A second identical Rolls-Royce followed close behind. Out of it emerged Jonathan Reynolds, in a charcoal gray custom suit and understated watch, flanked by two assistants in sharp business attire. A convoy of 4 black Escalades followed, each releasing more members of Jonathan's executive team. Every person in that group had closed multimillion-dollar deals before breakfast, and today was no different. Inside the store, the staff had begun their pre-opening routine, straightening display cases and preparing for the day. Some employees noticed the commotion outside, peeking nervously through the glass. Whispers rippled. "Is that him?" one sales associate murmured. "That's Jonathan Reynolds," said another, her voice shaky. "The tech billionaire." Panic began to stir. Upstairs in his office, Richard Whitmore, the same manager who had thrown Ava out the day before, adjusted his tie and forced a smile into the mirror. He hadn't slept well. The video of yesterday's incident had made the rounds on social media. His staff had whispered about the woman's identity, though he hadn't believed it. That couldn't have been her. She didn't look like someone important. Now, as the security team announced the arrival of high-profile guests, Richard descended the stairs briskly, his face arranged into a customer service mask. The doors unlocked at exactly 10 a.m. Ava stepped in first, the heels of her shoes tapping smartly against the marble. Behind her came Jonathan, followed by a dozen legal and corporate professionals who fanned out across the store like chess pieces, taking positions with practiced precision. The store went silent. Richard rushed forward. "Welcome to Elysian Beauty," he said, voice cracking as he tried to steady it. "How may we assist you today?" Jonathan looked him in the eye. Calm. Controlled. "I believe you met my wife yesterday," he said quietly. Recognition dawned on Richard's face like a slow, painful sunrise. His skin drained of color. His smile faltered. "Mrs. Reynolds," he stammered. I had no idea." "You didn't need to know," Ava replied evenly. "You only needed to treat people with respect." A corporate representative handed Richard a sleek leather folder embossed with the Reynolds Holdings logo. Inside were the ownership transfer documents. As of 4:30 that morning, Jonathan Reynolds held a controlling interest in Elysian's parent company. Richard's hands trembled. "This is no longer your store," Jonathan said, his tone still calm but firm. "It's ours now." And the reckoning had just begun. By 10:15 a.m., the doors of Elysian Beauty were locked again, but this time, from the inside. The blinds lowered electronically, casting a softer light across the polished floors and glittering displays. Customers who had begun to gather outside peered in, confused by the unusual gathering inside. Something important was happening, something that wasn't about cosmetics. Jonathan Reynolds stood in the center of the main floor with Ava beside him, her posture poised and composed. Around them, store employees formed an uneasy semicircle, sales associates, managers, and security personnel, all suddenly aware they were part of something far bigger than a routine morning meeting. Jonathan spoke with a quiet authority that made the room lean in. "Let me be clear," he began. "What happened yesterday to my wife wasn't an isolated mistake. It was the result of a culture, one that judges people by the color of their skin and their perceived social status. And that culture ends today." He nodded toward one of his team members, a sharp-eyed woman in a navy pantsuit. The lights dimmed, and a screen lowered in front of the fragrance wall. A presentation began, one the employees weren't prepared for. First came graphs and data. The numbers were hard to ignore. Across all 50 Elysian Beauty locations, the customer demographic was 92% white, despite stores operating in some of the most diverse cities in the United States, including Atlanta, Los Angeles, and Chicago. Then came surveillance footage. Short clips rolled one after another, security cameras showing white customers being greeted warmly, offered assistance, sometimes even champagne. Meanwhile, customers of color were overlooked, followed by staff, or quietly escorted away for no clear reason. A hush fell over the room. And then came the footage from the day before, Ava entering the store, being ignored, followed, and finally humiliated by Richard Whitmore and his team. The moment she was physically removed by security, despite posing no threat, played in high definition for all to see. Several employees looked away. Others wiped their eyes. When the lights came back on, Ava stood silently, her expression unreadable. She wasn't looking for sympathy, she was reclaiming her dignity. Jonathan's voice cut through the silence. "This brand has built its image on exclusivity," he said. "But what you call exclusivity has become a justification for prejudice." At his signal, the doors opened again. This time, 5 individuals entered, men and women of color, dressed with quiet elegance. They weren't celebrities. They were professionals. A retired black neurosurgeon. A Latino state judge. A South Asian hedge fund manager. Each had come to Elysian Beauty in recent months. And each had been dismissed, ignored, or told outright that this probably isn't the store for you. One by one, they shared their stories. Calmly. Factually. But the impact was profound. Then came 3 former Elysian employees, whistleblowers who had resigned or been terminated after raising concerns about the store's discriminatory practices. One had been told to focus on customers who looked like they belonged. Another was routinely assigned to work with black and brown clients, because, she was told, They don't usually buy much anyway. The room was no longer just silent. It was stunned. Ava looked around at the faces, some ashamed, some tearful, many just awakening to a reality they had never noticed. This wasn't about one bad manager. It was about an entire system. And now, that system was being brought into the light. The room was still reeling. Employees remained seated in the impromptu meeting space at Elysian Beauty's flagship store, their chairs now arranged in orderly rows where high-end display cases had been moments before. The glamour of the space, its chandeliers, marble counters, and whisper-quiet ambience, felt like a stage set for a moment of reckoning. Jonathan Reynolds stood at the front, his presence commanding but not theatrical. His voice was calm, even gentle, but every word landed with clarity and consequence. "This isn't just about one incident," he said, locking eyes with the staff. "This is about a broken culture, a culture that has quietly encouraged exclusion and profited from judgment disguised as luxury." A low murmur swept the room, but no one spoke. Ava, standing beside him, remained quiet but attentive, her hands folded in front of her, eyes scanning each face. Jonathan continued. "We didn't come here to lecture. We came here to rebuild." He took a deep breath before delivering the words that would change the lives of everyone present. Effective immediately, all 50 Elysian Beauty stores worldwide will be closed. Gasps echoed through the room. A few employees instinctively rose to protest. One woman in her 40s, a senior associate named Veronica, stepped forward. "You can't shut it all down," she said, her voice quivering. "I've worked here for 7 years. I have regular clients, families to support." Jonathan's gaze didn't waver. "Did you support my wife when she walked in yesterday? Or did you ignore her in favor of someone who looked more familiar?" Veronica hesitated. "I didn't know who she was." "That," Ava said, speaking for the first time, "is exactly the problem. You shouldn't need to know someone's last name to treat them with dignity." Silence fell again, heavier this time. Jonathan nodded to his legal team, who began handing out sealed envelopes to the employees. "Inside, you'll find severance details," he explained. 2 weeks of pay, regardless of tenure. But more importantly, you'll find instructions on how to reapply. He paused, letting the gravity settle. "We're not just shutting down. We're restructuring, completely. New leadership. New training. New values. We'll be hiring for every position, from the stockroom to senior management. But this time, we'll be doing it right." A few heads nodded. Others hung low. "The truth is," Ava added gently, "many of you were just following a system you didn't create. But going forward, we expect better from everyone. Not perfection. Just awareness and a willingness to grow." Security staff, not the old team, but professionals brought in by Jonathan's firm, began guiding employees toward the exit with quiet efficiency. There was no shouting, no chaos. Only the sound of luxury heels and leather soles moving across marble for what might be the last time. As Richard Whitmore, the now former store manager, stood paralyzed near the back, he clutched the folder with the ownership transfer documents. The empire he had helped maintain with exclusion and arrogance was now crumbling around him. And no one, not even Richard, was above accountability. Outside, the sun shone brighter than before, and for the first time, Elysian's doors closed not in the name of exclusivity, but for transformation. 6 months later, the Fifth Avenue storefront that once bore the name Elysian Beauty reopened its doors, but everything about it had changed. The sleek, mirrored sign was gone, replaced with bold, elegant lettering in brushed gold, "Legacy." the transformation wasn't just cosmetic, it was cultural. Gone were the tinted windows and intimidating glass partitions. In their place stood an open, sunlit space that invited people in rather than keeping them out. The grand reopening drew a crowd that wrapped around the block. News vans, fashion bloggers, and business reporters jostled for space alongside curious pedestrians and loyal supporters who had followed the story online. But this wasn't just another ribbon-cutting ceremony, it was the unveiling of a new philosophy in luxury retail. At the heart of it all stood Ava Morgan Reynolds, no longer the quiet woman who'd been dismissed as just browsing. Dressed in a soft navy blue pantsuit and modest gold jewelry, Ava addressed the crowd not as a victim, but as the newly appointed Chief Creative Officer of Legacy, a brand she had helped build from the ashes of injustice. True luxury, Ava began, standing before the store's wide new entrance, should never make someone feel small. At Legacy, we believe luxury is not about exclusion, it's about excellence, dignity, and shared humanity. The crowd applauded. Inside, the store reflected that vision. Legacy retained the refined materials, Italian stone, artisan lighting, hand-blown glass display jars, but the atmosphere was completely different. Price tags were now visible. Sales associates wore warm expressions, not cold judgment. And most striking of all, the staff truly reflected the diversity of New York City. People of every race, age, and background now filled the showroom floor, proudly wearing name tags that included not only their names but the languages they spoke, building immediate connection and inclusion with each guest. Each employee had completed a 6-week onboarding program developed by Ava herself, focused on unconscious bias, inclusive communication, and service from the soul. It wasn't optional. From top-level executives to overnight stock handlers, everyone underwent the same training. "We don't expect perfection," Ava had told them during the first session. "But we do expect self-awareness, humility, and growth." In the upper level of the store, once reserved for VIP champagne consultations, Legacy had established a design incubator studio. There, under Ava's mentorship, 10 up-and-coming designers from underrepresented backgrounds received grants, workspace, and guidance. One of the first recipients? Bethany, a former Elysian employee who had quietly stood up for Ava the day she was removed. Her handcrafted skincare line, rooted in her Jamaican grandmother's herbal remedies, was now featured prominently near the entrance, in packaging that honored her cultural heritage. Legacy's success wasn't just symbolic, it was financial. Within 4 months, sales exceeded Elysian's previous records by 34%. Customer satisfaction soared. Retail giants began studying Legacy's model, scrambling to replicate its inclusive approach. As the first Black-owned global luxury beauty brand, Legacy had made headlines and history. But for Ava, the most meaningful moment came quietly one afternoon, when a young woman, dressed simply, clearly nervous, lingered near a display of serums. Ava approached her gently. "That serum changed my skin," she said, offering a warm smile. "Would you like to try a sample before you decide?" The girl nodded, eyes lighting up. Because at Legacy, everyone belonged, and everyone was seen. 6 months after its bold relaunch, Legacy wasn't just thriving, it was rewriting the playbook for luxury retail in America. Sales were up 34% compared to Elysian Beauty's previous year, and customer reviews poured in from across the country, warm and welcoming. "I finally feel seen, luxury with heart." Legacy had expanded its reach across all 50 former Elysian locations, now transformed into havens of inclusion, integrity, and intentional design. But for Jonathan Reynolds and Ava Morgan Reynolds, Legacy's triumph wasn't just measured in quarterly profits or magazine covers. It was measured in changed minds, open doors, and a culture they had dared to reshape from the inside out. Jonathan, normally reclusive, granted a rare interview to the Wall Street Journal, filmed from his minimalist corner office above Legacy's flagship store. Behind him, through floor-to-ceiling windows, the bustle of Fifth Avenue carried on. Inside, the hum of activity below was steady and strong. Legacy isn't just a brand, he explained. It's a philosophy. Every company leaves a footprint. For decades, luxury retail has operated on the idea that exclusion equals value. We're challenging that. And the numbers backed him up. 68% of management roles across Legacy stores were now held by women and people of color. The employee satisfaction rate had jumped to 92%, with lower turnover and higher engagement than at any time in the company's past. Customer demographics, once staggeringly narrow, now reflected the actual diversity of the American population. Legacy wasn't just appealing to new customers, it was winning back former ones who had long felt unwelcome. Ava's Design Incubator initiative upstairs was thriving. Every year, 10 underrepresented entrepreneurs, chemists, formulators, designers, were selected to receive mentorship, funding, and a platform. One of the recent graduates had just signed a national distribution deal with a major retailer, thanks to exposure through Legacy's shelves. Even Legacy's competitors were starting to evolve. Quietly at first, then more openly, other luxury brands began revisiting hiring practices, client experiences, and employee training programs. Some called it the Legacy effect. But for Ava, the most profound shifts weren't in boardrooms or business forecasts. They happened in everyday moments. Like the one on a crisp Tuesday morning when a woman in her late 60s walked in, dressed in a windbreaker and sneakers. She paused at the entrance, taking in the polished floors, the elegant displays, but didn't move forward. A young Legacy associate approached with a smile. "Can I help you find something?" The woman hesitated. "I'm just looking. This place, it's beautiful, but I probably can't afford anything." Ava, standing nearby, stepped in gently. "You're welcome here, whether you're browsing or buying. Let me show you something that fits your needs, in your skin." They spent the next 20 minutes talking about moisturizers, grandkids, and how luxury had always felt like a private club with a locked door. "That door's open now," Ava said as she handed the woman a small complimentary sample. Because Legacy was never just about correcting a single wrong. It was about creating a new standard, one rooted in the belief that true luxury isn't about who you keep out, but who you lift up. And with each passing day, that belief was becoming a reality, one customer, one conversation, one act of dignity at a time. This story reminds us that dignity should never depend on appearance, income, or background. For many older adults, it echoes memories of quiet injustices we've witnessed or experienced throughout our lives. But it also delivers hope that change is possible when we confront wrongdoing with wisdom and resolve. Ava didn't lash out or seek revenge. She chose grace and principle. Jonathan used his influence not to destroy, but to rebuild something better, not just for his wife, but for countless others who had no voice. The lesson is clear: use what you have, be it wisdom, experience, or influence, to lift others up. Whether you're a customer, business owner, grandparent, or volunteer, we all have the power to stand up against exclusion and create spaces where people are valued for who they are, not how they look. Legacy teaches us that real luxury lies in kindness, fairness, and connection, and that we're never too old or too small to make a difference. Even one act of courage, done with heart, can echo for generations.